As background, the UN Security Council is comprised of 15 members, 5 permanent members, and then 10 other members who are non-permanent, who are elected every 2 years by the General Assembly of the United Nations. So the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council are China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And then right now, I'm not going to list all 10 of the non-permanent members, but some who have been elected include Japan, Switzerland, and Ecuador. So that's the background. And as many probably know, those 5 permanent UN Security Council members have veto power. So if there is a resolution that is proposed and one such member of those 5 decides to veto it, it doesn't matter if all 14 vote in approval of it. If one of those 5 say no, it's done. So, a few days ago, there was a resolution that came about in the United Nations Security Council, and it essentially called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza right now. But it did not make the release of the hostages a condition of that ceasefire. Now, in the past, the United States has said in many different arenas, but for relevance here in the United Nations, that we would want a ceasefire in Gaza to be conditional on the release of the hostages. And right now there by their accounts of 134 hostages in Gaza. Of course, many are believed to be dead. It is highly likely that many of them are in fact dead. So some people think that right now the amount of living hostages in Gaza stands at 60. But we, the United States, had previously made it very clear that we would only support a resolution for a ceasefire if there was a condition of the immediate release of the hostages. But then we had an about face, and we, the United States, abstained from voting on that resolution. So again, just for the sake of total clarity, because it is a little bit confusing, the resolution called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza right now, but did not make the release of the hostages contingent upon that ceasefire. However, in that resolution, there was a separate provision which called for the release of the hostages. But just having it there, the release of the hostages, is different than making the release of the hostages contingent upon the ceasefire. I'm seeing that Sean has a bit of a, look on his face. Is that making sense? Please say if it's not. I want to make it make sense.
Well, okay, so it's not in the agreement, but it's a provision.
Yes.
So why, you may not know the answer to the question. Why is it not in the agreement? Why is it a provision?
Well, no, it is a provision in the agreement. So the agreement calls for 2 things, and I'm quoting right now. The first is an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan leading to a lasting ceasefire. So essentially, the provision number 1 is an immediate ceasefire. And then provision number 2 is the immediate and unconditional release of the hostages. So there are those 2 things. But here's what's really important. That first provision, the immediate ceasefire, is not contingent upon the release of the hostages. They're basically stating 2 separate goals that they want. They want a ceasefire, and they also want the hostages released. But what they're not saying is there will only be a ceasefire if the hostages are released. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so there's definitely going to be a ceasefire, but we may or may not see the release of the hostages.
Well, just because the UN Security Council votes to pass this doesn't mean that it is actually going to happen. So no, it doesn't seem likely that there will be a ceasefire, even though they passed this. But they did not make the ceasefire contingent upon the release of the hostages. They voted to just have a ceasefire, and then as a separate thing say, by the way, we want you to also release the hostages.
Was it written that way so they could get the agreement, so they could get the vote passed?
Yes. It was. And so what's critical about this is that the United States, as one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council with the veto power, we did not vote to veto this. We abstained. So essentially what we said is that we neither endorse nor disapprove of this decision. We're just staying out of it. We're just staying neutral. And many people, understandably, are saying, wait a minute, this is messed up of the United States to do. The United States should veto this. They should only allow a resolution with regard to a ceasefire to pass if a condition of the ceasefire is that the hostages are released in order to have a ceasefire. But what the United States is doing is saying, whatever, we're going to abstain. We'll let you pass this resolution of a ceasefire with a separate provision saying you want the hostages released. And that is a kind of moral neutrality that many people, especially Israel, are very upset about.
So,
I hope we've done it.
By abstaining, they're tacitly giving approval.
Yes, exactly. Because we had the power to stop this and say, no, this is not going to pass unless we demand that the release of the hostages happens when the ceasefire happens. So by abstaining, we just threw our hands in the air and said, sure, we'll let this pass. And so many are saying, well, President Biden, understandably, took this course because he essentially wants to play both sides. He wants to indicate to mostly, hard left people in this country that he's not gung-ho Israel, but he also doesn't want to tick off the pro-Israel, contingent in this country. So he's essentially throwing his hands in the air and saying that he's abstaining. But being morally neutral is not neutrality. It is a choice. Not acting is itself an action. And so Israel has come out and said that essentially this is gross, and they have canceled a trip in which they were going to send high-level diplomatic leaders to Washington to meet with the president. They have called that trip off. And Israel has said that this vote to abstain, or it wasn't a vote to abstain, this abstaining is, quote, a clear departure from the consistent U.S. position and, quote, gives Hamas hope that international pressure will force Israel to accept a ceasefire without the release of the hostages. And that is absolutely right. Remarkably, though, it's both surprising and unsurprising. Our national security communications advisor for the Biden White House, John Kirby, has said that the United States decision to abstain with regard to this resolution is actually in keeping with what Israel would want it to do. Let's listen.
The president makes decisions based on the national security interests of the United States. And this decision to abstain on this resolution is in keeping with the national security interests of the United States. And quite frankly, it's in keeping with the national security concerns of the Israeli people.
Well, as I said, Israel does not seem to agree with that, as they have called off the diplomatic trip. And as I just quoted, they said that this marks a clear departure from the U.S. position and that they think it is giving Hamas hope. So that is just totally gaslighting and not at all in keeping with what Israel is saying with regard to this decision.
Every time I hear that guy, I feel like I'm sitting in the lobby of a used car dealership.
That's a really good analogy.
Like, I don't know how these people sleep with themselves at night. They are just, they just BS for a living, and they smile at you while they're doing it.
All of them. Kamala Harris, Karine Jean-Pierre, John Kirby, Merrick Garland, many of those individuals. That's exactly what they're doing. We, on this show, played part of Merrick Garland's speech. He's, of course, the Attorney General appointed by President Biden of the United States, where he was in Alabama giving a speech about how voter ID is racist and discrimination. It's just whatever department, whatever topic many of these individuals are discussing, you're absolutely right. You feel like they're just selling you a load of goods in order to preserve their base and just do what they think they have to do in the moment. But here's what they don't understand. As I said, being morally neutral is not neutral. you think by not making a decision, you're not making a decision. You are making a decision. And I think and hope that this decision to abstain, instead of appeasing both sides, as President Biden likely hopes it will actually tick off both sides, because the anti-Israel, pro-Hamas people are like, that wasn't forceful enough. You need to be more vociferous, President Biden, in your condemnation of Israel. But then the pro-Israel side will go, you're such a, whatever you just said, used car salesman. You are so trying to act morally neutral, and you are not standing up for Israel in the way that you need to. Shame on you. So I think it'll actually have the opposite effect as President Biden intends. Let's listen to another clip of John Kirby. He was asked if our relationship, the United States relationship with Israel, is at a new low, and he goes, no, it's all fine.
Just following on that question, how would you characterize the relationship in specific between Netanyahu and President Biden? Is their relationship at a new low?
I wouldn't describe it that way at all. I don't really have much more to add. I think I got the same question on Friday. These are two leaders who have known each other for going on now 4 decades. And they haven't in the past agreed on everything, and they don't agree on everything right now. But they both agree on one really important thing, and that is the importance of the state of Israel, the importance of the security of the Israeli people, the importance of making sure that an attack like the 7th of October doesn't happen again.
Oh, yes, you are really concerned about the safety of the Israeli people by not making a ceasefire contingent upon the release of the hostages. By the way, there are several American hostages in addition to Israeli hostages. It's just gross.
It's so important we abstained.
I know. That's a soundbite to put in the archives. And then here's another clip where John Kirby refused to answer if the United States would have a new resolution in which it would condemn Hamas.
If there were to be language added to it, updated to it, that condemns Hamas, would the U.S. support that resolution? Is that what you would say?
That's pretty speculative, MJ. I don't know if I can go there.
I don't know if I can go there. I mean, the moral confusion and the moral cowardice of these individuals is both not surprising and beyond belief. It reminds me of when those 3 university presidents of MIT, Penn, and Harvard were brought before Congress, and Elise Stefanik said, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate your university's, codes of conduct? And they were just, giving these mealy-mouthed kind of answers. By the way, I did a whole show on that. I talked about the legal implications, the, speech code on campus implications. That was a good show if you're interested in checking that out. But, that is the easiest answer to give by John Kirby. Of course the United States should have a language in a resolution that condemns Hamas. Genocidal, Jew-hating freak show. Are you kidding? But it shows you how captured these individuals are. They are so unbelievably captured by the hard left that they are afraid to say anything, even the most morally obvious thing in the world, because they so fear losing them. That is a terrible, terrible sign of our leadership in the state of our country. If President Biden wanted a ceasefire, if he was upset with if he is upset with what's going on in Israel, what he would really do is not abstain from this resolution. He would stop giving aid and weapons to Israel. He's not making decisions of consequence. He's just trying to play both sides here. But what's so sad about all of this is that Hamas and Iran and all of the people who hate Israel, who hate Jews, who hate the United States, and who hate Western civilization, they are getting exactly what they want. In the aftermath of October 7th, I wrote 2 articles, one in the Epoch Times and one in the American Mind. And what I postulated in those articles is that what happened on October 7th wasn't solely about Israel. Of course, in large part, it was about Israel. It was the worst, terrorist attack in Israel's history, of course. But what I said is that Hamas and Iran, and to the extent that they were involved, Russia and China, and all of those agents of evil and disorder, they not only want to destabilize and debilitate Israel, but they also hope to destabilize and debilitate the United States of America. And they knew that this issue would divide us, and it certainly has. As if our divisions on left and right weren't worse enough before October 7th. This has been a potent accelerant of our disunity and our division. And it's very sad to see that they are getting exactly what they want from this.